Welcome back. This is the second installment of video tapes for Health Policy Administration HPA 445, Organizational Leadership. And what I'm going to do today in this tape is outline for you some ways of thinking about the context of individual leadership. As you know, the first part of the individual leadership unit was for you to review and update your resume, for peers to review that, for me to review that, and to get you back comments on your resume. Your resume tells your story. Your resume is your window to the world. When you think about a potential employer, he or she has 100, 200, 300 resumes that they're looking at, and how do you set yourself apart? How do you demonstrate your leadership ability, your leadership capacity? So the first part of the unit was kind of self-reflection in terms of the workplace, and that being in the form of your resume. The second thing that I want to talk about, and again, this will be supplemented with the interview with Elizabeth Glasgow. But in the meantime, what I want to talk about is a concept that I call a leadership assessment. And usually what I put in front of that is rapid. A rapid leadership assessment. Now the concept of a rapid leadership assessment is, again, just kind of a framework for you to think about how it is that you behave normally, how people behave in the organizational context, in the relationship context, how people behave. And the way that I like to think about it is that when you're sitting down with an individual one-on-one or in a group setting, really what you're doing consciously and subconsciously is really this rapid leadership assessment. And the concept really flows from elements that I call leadership attributes. Leadership attributes. And to me, when we sit down across the table from an individual or at a group, in a group setting, we do this very interesting exercise of really assessing the people we're with. And what I want to do is just kind of frame that for you today, so that when you go into situations in which you're either in the work setting or the social setting even, but when you're going one-on-one, you kind of just think about this concept of doing a rapid leadership assessment, of looking at individual leadership attributes as you continue on your path towards becoming a successful leader yourself. So obviously, first and foremost, we think about what our own attributes are, and sometimes it's hard to do that self-reflection. It's important that you continue to do that. One of the things that I like to do in the context of looking at some of these attributes is talk to you about some of my own personal experiences, because it demonstrates to you how I reflect, how I'm a reflective leader. I am a leader, there's no question about it. I've been a leader since I was young. I served on my first committee when I was in middle school. It was called junior high school back then. I served on an alternative to drugs committee with a superintendent of the school district in which I grew up, and other community leaders, and I was a youth on that committee. And certainly, as you may understand, my bold leadership style that I had no problem speaking my mind in those meetings. And since that time, I have been in many meetings, in many settings. I've held many roles in terms of leadership on boards. Obviously, as you know, I'm a practicing attorney, and I've been a leader in my profession. I've been a leader as I've progressed up the academic chain, and so certainly when I reflect upon my own leadership attributes, I do so in the context, again, of kind of giving you some flavor of what you can do to reflect on your own individual leadership attributes. And the way I like to think about these leadership attributes are really two categories. Subjective, I'm going to have to switch pens, excuse me. Subjective and objective. I think when we think about leadership attributes, I believe that we really tend to start out with these subjective ones. When you think about, and what I have had you do, the assignment on the Blackboard side is to actually do some exercises in this regard. But the concept is to identify some of these subjective leadership attributes yourself and give a list to me. I'll give you a little bit of a list. Obviously, it's not exhaustive. This list is infinite based on descriptors you can use. But when you think about the first time that you sat across the desk from a boss or somebody that you had a lot of respect for or that you considered a leader, what kind of subjective attributes did that person have? For instance, you can recall that in going through that little anecdote I just did a few minutes ago, I used the term bold. So I'm a bold leader. There's many other subjective attributes. Energetic. Okay. Good listener. Okay. Charismatic. There are things like organized. Okay. There are things like calm. They're calm, and other attributes that I'm thinking of, like for instance, being a visionary. And again, these are really subjective, meaning they're difficult to measure, but you know them when you see them. Perseverance is an excellent leadership attribute. I misspelled it. Perseverance is, that's so important to keep going when times are tough, to keep proceeding along the path. Perseverance is a very important attribute, and close to that also is, hard worker. Those individuals in organizations that work, that do the work, you know them and you can identify them. Communicators, good communicators. Okay. Change agent. That's an important one. As we talked about in the first video, the importance of change, and that you have to get used to change in the organizational context. And how do people respond to change? There's certain people in the organizations that are change agents. They thrive off of change. Others are reluctant. Others, follow, the change agent's lead. That's not to say, as you'll see in the readings, that the people that are followers aren't leaders. You'll see in the Burns readings and other readings that you're progressing through right now that you don't have to be a change agent to be a leader. These attributes may fit into the individual's leadership assessment, or they may not. Things like empowering, right? So these are ways of thinking about a leader, and of course I'll be looking for a list from you on what you see as subjective leadership attributes. I like to also, and again, this is part of the assignment, and so I'm kind of giving you the answer. But it's okay because I want you to think about this. It's a very sensitive issue oftentimes when we think about these objective criteria, objective attributes that make people leaders. And these are things that oftentimes serve as barriers to individuals accepting each other, to developing relationships. But I think that we all, do a rapid leadership assessment and really, look at these objective attributes. All of us do it, and we just have to be honest about it and understand what the impact of these objective attributes are to the conversation that we're having. So, for instance, objective, meaning that you can measure it. For instance, gender is a big one. You're either a male or a female. Now, there's some crossover there, but that's a very small percentage. And even that comes into play. I mean, think about if you know that you're in a conversation with an individual that's transgender. You know that. You've assessed that. You've put that into your analysis of that person as a leader. Wow, that person has guts to do that. Wow, it must have taken a lot of perseverance to get to that point. So even transgender is an objective leadership attribute. But think about gender in general. In public health, we tend to see a lot of females in the profession. It's one of those professions that has a lot of females. Oftentimes, when I go into a meeting, I may be one of the only males in the meeting, maybe the only male. Because of that, I do a rapid leadership assessment, and I change my behavior to some degree based on the fact that I'm in a room with mostly females. Okay, that's just the way that we are as people. We adjust based on some of these attributes. When I'm practicing law, that is a profession that's again moving more towards 50-50. But traditionally, when I started practicing, it was mostly men in that profession. So I would treat those situations differently. How I interact with males is different than how I interact with females. And of course, it becomes very tricky in the workplace, particularly, because there is a tendency of utilizing the strengths and weaknesses that come with gender differences. And oftentimes it becomes a power, a way of exhibiting power one way or the other. And of course, there is the issue of sexuality in organizations. It can't, again, these are sensitive issues, but they can't be forgotten about. And there's, as an attorney, I can tell you, there's many cases and examples of women particularly that are sexually harassed or sexually provocated, in the workplace, and again, either by males or sometimes females, but again, that has to do with that power struggle oftentimes. So gender is a huge objective leadership attribute that you need to take into account when you're sitting down one-on-one. How you adjust your presentation, how you respond, react. And again, it's sensitive. You can't overgeneralize. You can't say all women are this way or all men are this way, but it informs the way that you behave, your organizational behavior. And of course, there are obviously some very important, most of you taking this course are women, and there's some very important things occurring in terms of women in leadership in our worldview, kind of moving to the last unit that we talk about. And throughout, I mean, women in positions of leadership, women CEOs of large multinational corporations. How does that work when you're a woman leader of a large multinational corporation going into cultures that treat women differently? How do you adjust, or do you adjust? Maybe they got to be the CEO because they've transcended that somehow. So gender is a very important part of the conversation. In addition, we have race. Race. Race is a critical conversation that we have to have. We can't not have the conversation because of the sensitivity of it. As good leaders, and particularly when we're talking about the public's health and public health, we need to talk about race. We know that there are health disparities among certain races vis-a-vis others, African Americans or people of color. Of course, our worldview again has become so complex that a black person may not be an African American. Maybe they're Caribbean American. Maybe they're some other country entirely from Africa. Maybe they come from a heritage that melds white and black, Latino, brown, Asian, whatever. So it's hard to categorize these things. But when we sit down at a meeting with an individual or with a group of individuals, we do that rapid leadership assessment. Okay, we look at that attribute. The person is black. We do. Black people do it to white people. Okay, when I go to a meeting, and again, I'm in public health. So a lot of times, not only am I sitting in a meeting where it's mostly women, but I'm sitting in a meeting that's mostly black women. Okay, and so I have learned to adjust how I present information. Not again being too generalized about this, not in any prejudicial way, but just how you approach the situation. If we're honest about it, we do change our behavior based on the gender of the individual that we're talking to, the race of the individual that we're talking to. It does come into play. So when we do that rapid leadership assessment, these subjective attributes, subconsciously, okay, you're considering them. What I'm asking you to do is kind of make them more conscious, be conscientious about them. A perfect example that I like to give is some work when I first got into public health down the Inglewood part of Chicago, the Inglewood community in Chicago. And I just remember, walking into a community meeting with, all African American people, all people of color, all black people, however you want to describe them. The room was all black, except for the other presenters. And I sat in the back and observed. The other two presenters went to the front and talked, and kind of talked down to the community. When it was my turn, I observed some of the non-verbals that I was getting from the audience, the people that were the community folks that were in this meeting, about how they were responded. Things like trust, things like again, getting back to the subject of it, I'll put that on the list. Trustworthy, a big one. Can they trust these outsiders coming into their community? Again, how you adjust, how you conscientiously approach a situation definitely is impacted by the gender and the race of the individuals that you're working with or meeting with. Other objective criteria or objective attributes. Age. Okay? Age makes a difference. In terms of objective criteria, when you're sitting down one-on-one, you may either consciously or unconsciously say, okay, this is an older person. I will defer to the person. I will respect that person because of their age. Sometimes it's the opposite. I will disrespect that person because of their age, or I will question their understanding of Twitter and other uses of technology. That's one of the gaps we have right now in our culture, is that people my age and older don't have the grasp of technology that you young people do. And so how can we work together on closing that gap? It's important. It's important for public health as we, for instance, use that technology as a tool for data gathering, as a tool for disseminating information. Technology is so critical in the uses of technology, and yet older people are challenged more. How can we have a web-based intervention on cancer prevention, say, if a large part of the population is elderly and don't know how to navigate through the web? It becomes an issue. So age is a critical piece. I remember several years ago already, where I went to a meeting, and again, I've gone to meetings since I was very young, and it's been a very important, critical part of my professional career is attending meetings. As you see, when you are in a field, a discipline like public health, meetings are a big part of what you do. I remember being in a meeting one day and looking around and realizing all of a sudden that I was one of the older people in the room. It was like an aha moment. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm not a younger person anymore in this room. I'm an older person. It changed my demeanor. It changed the way that I had confidence in terms of what I was saying. It changed the way in which I interacted with others in that meeting. So, age is an objective attribute that comes into play when you're doing this rapid leadership assessment. Gender, race, age, ethnicity, religion. Religion is a huge issue, and one that, again, we need to, as good leaders. Oh, by the way, another subjective one is risk taker. Many good leaders take risks. To me, that's a critical subjective attribute. Well, when you get into objective attributes like religion, how do you effectively take a risk when you're trying to bridge worlds that think differently in our worldview? When the Palestinians are meeting with the Israelis, for instance, when the Shiite are meeting with the Sunni, how do we bridge that gap? How do we account for or have influence by, or be more effective understanding the person's religion in terms of objective criteria. So that's an important one. One of the ones that I like to talk about, and again, this is kind of in the middle because it's kind of subjective and kind of objective, so I'll put it over here, is appearance. Appearance. Okay, and when I'm mentoring young people on the other world, the world that I spend a lot of my time in terms, as many of you know, in terms of policy advocacy. If I'm mentoring young people on how to be effective advocates, one of the things I talk about is how to dress, how to look good in meetings. And it is very important. As you can see, I'm wearing a suit, okay? I always wear a suit, almost every day. It's part of who I am. It helps define me as a professional. I do it out of respect. Oftentimes, my only activity, public activity of the day, may be teaching a class to master's students. I wear a suit. Why do I do that? Out of respect for the students, out of my professionalism. It helps define who I am. It's objective. People say, oh yeah, the guy in the suit, okay? When I'm, by vocation, an attorney. Attorneys wear suits. So part of it is defining who I am. I'm not saying it's always appropriate to wear a suit in every setting. I'm saying in terms of when you're doing a rapid leadership assessment and looking at the attributes of an individual like myself, when you're sitting at a meeting, you might say, oh, he is formal. He's wearing a suit, okay? So that makes a difference. What you look like, what you wear. It is one that I cannot overemphasize, because one of the things that's happened in our culture is young people are comfortable, going to college classes and high school classes in their pajamas, basically, in sweats and flip-flops. And it's like, okay, that's your culture, and I, as an older person, have to adjust to that. But at the same time, it does have an impact on how people perceive you. It's a perception thing. So appearance is a big issue. And again, it's somewhat of a style thing. For instance, you may notice that while I wear a suit, you may have noticed that my tie is always undone a little bit. Why? Because when I go into the community, I don't want, it's purposeful, okay? Because when I go into the community, I don't want to look too slick. I want there to be a respect that I am a professional and that I respect the community enough to come to a meeting in a suit as opposed to sweats and flip-flops. On the other hand, I want them to know that I'm working hard on their behalf and that I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and to loosen my tie. It's symbolic. I've always done that. The only time that I put my tie up is when I have to go to court and appear before a judge, because judges, and I have been told by a judge before, may say to you, tighten your tie, because it is in that formal and in that setting of a courtroom, you must be formal and look good, or a judge may rule against you. So appearance is big, and of course, again, as you're in the community working, you have to make that judgment call, both in terms of your reflective leadership, what these things mean to you, okay, as well as how you're assessing and how you're feeling how other people are in the room, okay? So it's really both. These have to do with you as well as the people that, that you're looking at. So these are some objective attributes. And there's others. And I have asked you in the assignment to kind of list out some subjective attributes and objective attributes. Obviously, there's only a limited list of objective ones. And I haven't given you all of them. So if you can be creative, think outside the box, be higher level thinkers. Think about some other objective criteria. I've given you some examples from my own background. And again, what I like to do is really have you see that as a leader, I reflect on these attributes. I reflect sometimes that I'm a risk taker. And maybe that sometimes may be detrimental, but that's part of my leadership style. So in terms of attributes, this one is certainly one that that I account for myself, and the objective criteria as I've described to you. So this is just a framework by which to think about the concept of leadership assessment. It is a way of thinking about it. We do this automatically, subconsciously and sometimes consciously, but what I want you to do is put it in the context of what we're talking about in this class. What does it mean to do a rapid leadership assessment and establish or define leadership attributes when you're working in the community, when you're working in the policy setting at the national or state level, or most important, what does it mean when we get out into the world, into our worldview? And of course, on the lower part of the hierarchy, as I said out last tape, what it means in terms of that relationship and how we are out there, how we're putting ourselves out there as individuals. So it's just a frame, a way for you to think about this, and hopefully it was useful for you. So I will be presenting some further material in other videos, and this concludes the conversation about rapid leadership assessment. Thank you.